The Space Race, a mini documentary. The space race was a time of competition between the United States and Soviet Russia to show superior spaceflight capabilities. It lasted from 1955 to 1975. It started from the ballistic missile arms race between the Soviet Union and America, which slowly ramped up into spaceflight technology. My thesis is that the space race was one of the most defining aspects in American history because it set a new precedent of technological standard for the rest of the world, inspired many generations individually, and solidified America as a global superpower. The space race started in 1955, when Soviet Russia responded to the United States' space program with similar intent. Just 2 years later, the Soviet Union launched their Sputnik satellite, which became the first man-made object in space. The launch of the Sputnik satellite shocked everyone, especially Americans. An article from USA Today states that the communist government launched Sputnik on October 4, 1957, a beach ball-sized satellite that startled and panicked America as it orbited the Earth. Many were inspired and took an interest in spaceflight from the launch of the Sputnik satellite. The movie that I watched, October Sky, directed by Joe Johnston, tells a story about a boy named Homer, who was inspired by the Sputnik launch and wanted to go into space, even though his father wanted him to take his place as a coal miner.
Is the reason you skipped work today?
Yes, sir.
Well, you put all this nonsense behind you, Homer. Thought you weren't going to be doing
Dad,
it.
it isn't nonsense.
I don't want to argue with you. Look, son, I can't even begin to tell you how proud of you I've been these past weeks. I mean, you just been doing a hell of a job in that mine. You keep going, you're going to have my job someday. Everybody says so. You got any idea how proud that would make me?
Dad, but
I guess what I'm saying is that if this rocket stuff is so important to you, then so be it. As long as you're careful. Guess there's worse hobbies you could have. But skipping work, that's out of line. And you got to know that. So, let's go and get you right with Jake. Tell him you'll work the hoot owl shift tonight.
No. The coal mine's your life. It's not mine. I'm never going down there again. I want to go into space.
I thought this scene was important because it shows the impact of the space race from an individual perspective, rather than a historical perspective. This story was based on a true story about the same boy with the same name. Outside of the movie, he eventually worked at NASA as an engineer. Most of the story stayed consistent with the space race theme, but in order to make it more entertaining, they left out some major historical events. For example, the Apollo 11 launch and the first man and dog in space from the Russian perspective. Importantly, I think this conveys the individual aspect to why the space race was so defining in American history. Another important source for my thesis is when John F. Kennedy makes a speech at Rice University in Houston, Texas, about achieving the impossible and setting a new technological standard for the rest of the world.
Now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom. Man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
John F. Kennedy says that if we want to be a global superpower and to protect our allies from a hostile conquest, we need to stay ahead in events like these. And this is another reason why the space race was one of the most defining moments in American history. Another important source for my thesis is my interviewee, Andy Pierce. Here's what Andy has to say.
There is no Buck Rogers, no Bucks. In other words, you can send up all the satellites, all the probes, you can do all this cool NASA space stuff. If you don't put a person up there, nobody's interested, which is essentially what happened later on after Apollo 11 and Apollo 13. Yeah, we were sending guys up there, but people weren't interested anymore. They said, oh, we already did it. Done. So the whole point of, the Soviets had gotten the first satellite with Sputnik, but they hadn't gotten a guy up. Until they got a guy up, they were first. That scared the Jesus out of people. And I don't well know if I remember this at the time. So this could be a false memory, but I certainly know about it now. There was great fear in the United States back then about Soviets, if they conquer space before we do, they're going to start dropping atomic bombs from space, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Andy explains how people felt terrible and fearful after the Soviet Union launched their satellite, and there was a lot of fear that the Soviet Union would send atomic bombs from space. This further supports the fact that winning the space race was an important step for the US to become a global superpower. And also, when Andy says no Bucks, no Buck Rogers,
there is no Buck Rogers, no Bucks.
He really means that if there's no money, there's no space travel. And the slang comes from a movie called The Right Stuff, where Bucks is slang for money, and no Buck Rogers is a character symbolizing space flight to the moon. The Soviet Union also put the first man in space, named Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, in 1961. After 10 planning and scouting missions from NASA, the US was finally ready to land the first person on the moon. On July 16, 1969, 732 million people worldwide watched the launch of Apollo 11 on board the Saturn V rocket to the moon. Commander Neil Armstrong, pilot Michael Collins, and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin were off to the moon. As shown by all of these examples, the space race was more than just a fight for technology. It was also a fight for each country's lifestyle. It was a fight of capitalism and democracy versus communism, and the Soviet Union versus the United States. The space race also impacted people individually, and it also inspired many people to become astronauts in the future. This is why I claimed that the space race was one of the most defining aspects of America in American history. Thank you for watching.